So is it possible to be too smart? Can a problem or a set of circumstances be overanalyzed? Is there such a thing as having too much information? There's some evidence out there that that is indeed possible. I'm Kent Kramer. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Foster Group. And for the next few minutes, we're going to share our perspective on what's been happening in financial markets and the economies around the world, and what we think successful investors might want to be thinking about without overthinking it. Much as we'd all like to put COVID in the rearview mirror, the stubbornness of the virus, particularly the newer, the highly contagious Delta variant, is keeping a sense of normalcy from fully returning. Vaccination rate of adults in the US has risen over 62%. 72% have had at least one dose. All ages in the US, around 51% is the total vaccination. Child vaccination rates have been a little bit slower due to vaccination development and approval by the CDC. The good news is that vaccination has been very effective in blunting the serious symptoms associated with the virus. As well, breakthrough cases, or people who contract the virus even though they've been vaccinated, that number has been very, very low, those breakthrough cases, about 0.1%, according to an August 17th Wall Street Journal article. The number of breakthrough cases is likely higher than that number, but because the symptoms in vaccinated people are so muted, that it's estimated that a lot of the people who are actually maybe catching the Delta variant but have been vaccinated are not getting tested. So the numbers may be underreported, perhaps by quite a bit. Unemployment data across the board continues to show strong improvement in the United States. Last week's report showed continuing claims for unemployment falling to 2.9 million. That's measured through regular state programs. That's the lowest number since March of 2020. Employers added a seasonally adjusted 943,000 jobs in July. That's the largest increase in a year. And job openings rose to 10.1 million in June. That's the highest since records began being kept in the year 2000. There are now more jobs available than the estimated 9.5 million people who are looking for them in July. Job creation has remained a little bumpy and kind of hard to find the numbers that make sense all the time, but some of that slowness has just been due to maybe consumer activity in terms of entertainment, travel, and the dining sectors. Again, we just talked about that Delta variant. There's uncertainty, in particular in different parts of the country where those infection rates have been rising, now hopefully peaking, but we'll see. The other thing that's kind of created a little uncertainty is the number of part shortages in manufacturing. This has caused some issues. Last week, Toyota announced that they would idle 40% of their new car production until the chip shortage that has plagued car makers and other manufacturers begins to iron out. That's a big change in production. But the economies have really improved quite a bit, and we can see that in these numbers. The size of countries' economies as measured by their GDP has recovered for many during 2021, and the list includes US, Russia, Ireland, and China. Actually, China is fully recovered back to its pre-COVID level in 2020. In the fourth quarter, the OECD expects Germany, India, Sweden to surpass their pre-COVID GDP numbers, with most countries fully recovering sometime in 2022. That means their economies will be as large or larger than they were pre-COVID March of 2020. After crossing the threshold in the second quarter of 2021, the US economy is now bigger than ever. GDP grew at 3.1% during the second quarter, which was the highest nominal growth rate since the third quarter of 1981. A lot of good economic growth. And attached to those very good GDP results, companies have really been driving a lot of that. Companies in the S&P 500 stock index reported record earnings growth of 89.3% in the quarter ended and revenue growth of 24.9%. That revenue growth was the highest year-over-year number ever recorded by FactSet since they began tracking in 2008. Earnings growth is the strongest since the fourth quarter of 2009. Now, these numbers and the very high percentage of companies that are beating analyst revenue estimates, again, 87% of companies beat the analyst estimates for the revenue growth. This shows that the doubling of value in the S&P 500 since March of 2020 is being driven by a lot more than sentiment. There's real economic numbers, real company profitability behind that recovery. In the last few weeks, since June 30th, US markets have been somewhat divided between large companies and small companies, with big companies leading the way so far this quarter. That's the green number on top. Emerging markets, the pink number on the bottom, they've seen more significant declines. A lot of that is because of changes in China. The crackdown on Chinese tech companies has caused some capital flight, and their central government seems determined companies and their access to capital. And this has caused investors around the world to take a pause in terms of how comfortable they are with investing in Chinese companies. Small companies which have had an excellent 12-month return started to give a little bit of their return advantage back this quarter with the more steady increase in the S&P 500 index of larger US companies. You can see that on the chart here. But overall, regardless of where you've been invested, the last 12 months have been pretty good for stock market investors globally. So what happens next? This question never really gets old, does it? And it's never really well answered either. The table here illustrates how we think things ought to work. Given enough data points, we think we should be able to evaluate what to do now. Think about this table as a plus or minus chart. And for each one of the options on the left column there, we think, well, is that going to have a positive or negative effect on stocks, bonds, and the economy? Our current list is pretty long. Afghanistan, the Delta variant, Fed tapering, record earnings, fiscal stimulus, inflation, potential tax increases, forest fires, climate change, cryptocurrency. I mean, it's a long list of things that we are needing to take into account in terms of making a prediction about what might happen next. Now, complexity of circumstances is nothing new, but the list always contains relatively new items, and each day brings its own story for us to evaluate. And we do that. We love cause and effect. We like to think through a narrative. If basic market structures, though, are still in place and there's no dramatic non-economic forces like COVID reemerging, the expectation is probably still that stocks are going to outperform bonds over longer periods of time, and that a diversified global strategy is a sensible one. Now, that's a fairly simple answer, but when you look at the complexity of this table, the question is, can you do better? Just to illustrate how hard this is to get right, remember the causes, the things that are impacting the 6 to 12 month stories that were being told in 2020. With COVID and the global pandemic and then the resulting economic lockdowns, who would have guessed that the 6 to 12 month net result, the effects on the economy and stock market, would have so quickly resolved and put us back into positive territory, as you just saw with stock markets and GDP numbers. I recently heard an interview with Greg Jensen, the co-CIO of Bridgewater and Associates. Now, Bridgewater is one of the most successful hedge fund and equity managers in the world. They manage over $150 billion today. Greg said that with all their data and analytical power and the brilliant people that they hire, COVID and the immediate aftermath was a prime example of something they got precisely wrong. They significantly underperformed the market and struggled to maintain clients. So even with all of their analytical prowess, all of the data, all the computer simulations, all the algorithms and the smart people employed at Bridgewater, they missed it. Their table didn't give them the right answer. So as we asked at the beginning, is it possible to be too smart or to have too much information? Morgan Housel's recent blog, Too Smart, asked that same question. He appealed to the findings of behavioral psychologists who remind us that as humans, we love to look for patterns, for narratives, and then we look for the data points to support or to make sense of the complex story that we like to tell. Now, the second quote is also from Housel. He's quoting physicist Richard Feynman. And while it's humorous, Feynman warns us that outsmarting ourselves by spending too much time overanalyzing data and stories like this, we have little chance of making consistent sense of everything. And unfortunately, the easiest person to fool sometimes when we're spinning these elaborate stories is ourselves. So rather than try to fill in our plus and minus cause and effect table to produce our best guess of where markets will go next, what if we did the more boring thing and we just stayed invested in a diversified portfolio designed to get us to our longer term investment goals? We want to be smart, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if in our quest for brilliant insight, we forget to take care of the simplest things, Housel's 90%, things like reasonable spending, broad diversification, and patience, because they seem too easy or too simple, we might miss the biggest opportunities we have to actually be the cause of our own success, the things that we have control over. Hey, by the way, Foster Group will be hosting a special event on October 21st featuring Morgan Housel. It's going to be in West Des Moines. Morgan is a very insightful writer. He combines financial theory, interesting historical anecdotes. He's a good storyteller, and he just helps people make better decisions. If you're interested in that, more information will soon be appearing on our website. We hope you'll check it out. And if you can join us, that would be great. Hey, as always, if you have any questions or would like to meet with the Foster Group advisor, please contact us. Our team is fully engaged every day. We're happy to meet in person or via technology, whatever works for you the best. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. We'll try not to be overwhelming with data, as we've talked about here, but we do like to have those conversations. And if you want to talk about your financial plans or investment portfolio, we'd love to have that conversation. Also, we always like to address particular questions that you may have. So if you have a topic you'd like to see us address in financial perspectives, please drop us a note and let us know, and we'll try to incorporate it in future editions. For now, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again in the near future.